Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Engineer podcast. I am your host, Sotak Andrei, and you're listening to episode 15, in which I'm about to be joined by legendary strength coach Børge Fagerli from Norwegian to discuss one of his recent nutrition experiments, where he gave the infamous Carnivore Diet a try for a couple of months. And in this episode, he shares his experiences with that and his overall thoughts on it. So we recorded this episode a while ago, and I honestly thought that I kinda missed the boat with this one. I just assumed that by the time I released this whole craze will die off. I just thought it would be another fad, if I might call it that people would just kinda try and then transition away from. But to my surprise, it not only hasn't died off, but it has become even more popular with some well-known fitness figures and personalities adopting it and claiming it to be the latest and greatest thing ever. So in this episode, you will get an unbiased scientific opinion on it from one of the most highly respected people in the fitness industry, and you will also get a ton of cool insights into Børge's mindset and nutritional approach, and some very interesting considerations around your food intake and how you should perhaps vary it depending on your ancestry or time of the year and all that. And it was an episode that really, I guess, opened my mind even more and challenged some of my, I don't know if I might call them beliefs, but certainly some views that I previously held, and I've since then reconsidered, and I hope that you will find it helpful and a bit different from the usual black or white attitude around this topic. Because from what I've seen, most people either claim that this whole carnivore diet is either useless or stupid, or they claim it's the greatest thing ever and everyone should just stop eating anything else other than meat. So let's start the episode and let's hear Mr. Børge Fagerli. Børge Fagerli, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And I must commend you on the pronunciation. That's one of the better ones so far.
Great. We have a ton of nutrition-related topics to go through today, and one of which is your famous or infamous, depending on how you want to look at it, zero carb experiment. And in the evidence-based fitness community, I've seen you get praise and hate and everything in between it for it.
Oh yeah.
And I also listened to the podcast Sean Baker did with Joe Rogan, and it was interesting, and it had some dubious claims in it, but it was thought-provoking nonetheless.
For sure.
So as a background for people, could you explain in a couple of brief words what made you start this whole experiment, I guess? And one of the questions that I saw come up is, why did you decide to do this, or were there any scientific reasons behind this when, as some people formulated this, when the majority of nutritional science points to the opposite direction, a diet higher in fiber or in veggies and fruits would be the optimal, I guess, for health and longevity and whatnot?
Yeah, well, I'm always curious about, is there something we're missing? And I always want to learn more. And I think the only way to move forward and to evolve and to, develop a more rational approach to everything from diet and nutrition is to always question our beliefs. And when it comes to science, science today, research is always good to point us in the right directions, but there's also so many confounding variables with research that basing everything on science and research can sometimes be a little hard to do, in effect, because I think I do agree that the majority of science points in the direction of a plant-based diet with lean proteins, essential fats, and that's the consensus. But I don't think we should exclude an all-meat diet just because we lack research on it. I have tried this type of diet both in myself and in my client, and with, I would say, with variable success, and obviously compared to a diet based on McDonald's and processed junk food, it's obviously going to be a lot better. But there are still people that don't really feel good on it. And even despite all our knowledge and all the research and all the science and all the doctors and experts and authorities, we still have people with unexplainable diseases and incurable diseases. And even though we have a longer lifespan, I mean, longevity has improved tremendously over the last decades and millennia, but we still have more disease and obviously more obesity than before. Now, obesity is obviously linked to, well, it's complex, but the palatability of foods, the combinations of flavors that makes us overconsume foods, combined with inactivity. I mean, I think we can pretty much agree that that's one of the main driving factors behind it. And obesity also leads to inflammation, which leads to various diseases and ailments. But even then, we have otherwise healthy people developing diseases and autoimmune disorders where the body starts attacking its own cells. And we have cancer, and we have, just stuff that we really can't cure with our modern knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle. And so my journey through health and nutrition has led me through, the research and understanding of biorhythms, and I think most people will probably know me as the biorhythm guy. And I have brought forward concepts and ideas and theories that science has only now, the last few years, begun to actually prove. And now more and more people are talking about it online and discussing it and accepting it. Whereas before they were really against it and thought that this was just, bad science, or, we didn't have research to prove it, so there couldn't be anything to it. And as I like to say, the absence of evidence doesn't mean the evidence of absence. So sometimes you just gotta be open to and willing to try stuff, even if science doesn't have any answers or any, even if there's no research actually supporting this. So that was just a long way of getting to the point. And to answer your question, what made me decide to try this diet? I was curious. I listened to the podcast with Sean Baker that probably more and more people know by name now, since he recently appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast. I listened to his podcast on, I think it was Corporate Warrior, this high-intensity training guy, I would say. That's because that's what most of his podcasts are about. And I was intrigued. And I started digging into this, and I read the book The Fat of the Land by Vilhjálmur Stefansson. I looked at Walter Vogelin stuff, which is, he's known as the father of the Paleolithic diet back in the 60s and 70s. Just some of the old studies, old research and old case studies. And came upon the Facebook groups where there, in the tens of thousands of people that are actually following this all-meat diet. I heard about the Anderson family, a family that's been renowned within the community, a zero-carb community, where they basically both became healthy, lean, and cured various diseases. I just read tons of case studies, and obviously we shouldn't trust anecdotes, because it can be fraught with so many issues. But I still think there's value in it. And if there's sufficient anecdote talking about something, then maybe there's something to it. And I think it bears experimenting with. I was inspired by that. And I think the main reason to actually try it for myself was that there was sort of a common theme in the feedback that people reported. Not only did they feel more energetic, and like more mental clarity, but they reported major improvements in gut function, in digestion and gut function. And I have been struggling with digestive issues and bloating and that kind of stuff for a long time, and having variable success with various treatments. And so I thought this was something worth trying. I had also been experimenting with a ketogenic diet before, quite unsuccessfully, I should add, and that also led to a lot of digestive issues. So I thought, well, maybe it's the plant food. Maybe for some reason this is something that doesn't go well with my digestion, and maybe I should at least take a break from it. So, why not try, just as an experiment? Go for 30 days, see what happens. And those 30 days eventually turn into 60 and almost 90 days. So yeah, I think that's a long way of answering your short question, but I think it's important to provide some context.
Yeah, for sure. Context is key. And for whatever reason, I always find myself emphasizing the other two components of the evidence-based practice to people during discussions, especially around training. And I definitely experiment with training more myself, but I don't do these kind of nutrition experiments on a regular basis like you do, and maybe I should, but who knows. And as far as bloating goes, so I tried to put on some muscle, and for 2 weeks or so I had these fruit muesli things with whole grain oats and wheat and whatnot, and tasted amazing, but man, the bloating, I swear I felt like a pregnant woman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean that's. I also came upon this vegan blog. Someone had posted on the topic, like the bloating and the gas, and I mean there were literally thousands of comments in that under that blog post from vegans that had been basically suffering with indigestion and bloating and gas and flatulence and all that stuff for years. And of course, these are at the other end of the spectrum, eating all plants and no meat. And I just found that, well, first of all, really funny, because the stories they would tell, I mean, about doing yoga classes and trying to hit the most difficult poses and basically just, so you can imagine. And so I thought, well, maybe obviously plant foods are healthy, but maybe not in large amounts all the time for everyone. So I tend to think about nutrition as individual, and I think, again, we should always try to challenge our own beliefs and instead of becoming dogmatic. I think being vegan is just as bad as being a zero carber, and the funny thing is about posting about my experiment, it just proved how polarizing nutrition can be, because I used to be labeled as the carb guy just because I was talking about or actually recommending that most people, especially women, they should beware of going low carb for extended periods of time. And now that I started posting about zero carb, I become known as the zero carb guy. And it's as if people want to put labels on you, whereas in my opinion, I think we should try to learn as much as possible about how nutrition affects each one of us and how it maybe or possibly should actually change according to our individual constitution, genetics, and response.
Yeah, definitely. We will get into all of that. But I like to joke that the best predictor of a leg workout is a successful pooping session.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one.
If you have a full stomach, usually those workouts don't go well and don't end well.
Exactly. And the bottom position of a squat is known for being the perfect way to relieve constipation. There is actually like squatting chairs or
squatty potty.
Squatty potty, yeah, made for sitting in the squat position just to be able to relieve yourself more easily.
So what meats did you eat? What constituted your diet? Did you eat any sort of organ meats, or did you take any sort of supplements to counterbalance the lack of certain micronutrients that you wouldn't get from this diet? And One other question that came up was the potential overdosing of iron consuming large amounts of red meat. And one final practical question, I'm curious, how expensive was this diet compared to a regular balanced one?
Okay, so to answer the first question, I mostly ate red meat. So, ribeye can be pretty expensive, so I did eat a lot of ground meat. The food quality here in Norway is spectacular compared to the rest of the world. We really take care of our animals, and there are really strict regulations in terms of what we can feed animals and how we can treat them. And there's, you can actually get grass-fed meat without actually having to buy something with that label on it, because we just prefer to feed our cattle grass. So I basically just trusted that the meat I was eating was of high quality, and since ground meat is a lot cheaper than eating like ribeyes and those more expensive cuts of meat, that was probably the main part of my diet. I ate a lot of eggs. I did exclude dairy for the first part of the experiment, so for the first 3 to 4 weeks, but then I reintroduced some dairy, because I do like my protein powders that I develop myself and sell through my own web store. Or not my own, I'm the product manager there now, but still. I had some bacon because I like it. I did also consume some bone broth, and that's the gist of it. I did also have some fish now and then, but I'm not a huge fan of eating fish, so that's,
me neither.
So I did eat it once in a while, but it didn't constitute a major part of it. I do enjoy some liver now and then if I prepare it the right way, but not a lot of it. So some liver, but not a lot. I didn't take any supplements at first, although I did at some point introduce some omega-3s. So fish oil, since again I don't consume a lot of fish. As far as the question of the lack of certain micronutrients and minerals, looking at if you go online and just search, there's a comparison chart of kale, blueberries, beef, and beef liver, and actually beef and beef liver wins out on basically every micronutrient and vitamin and mineral. So no, I was not concerned about that at all. I actually found the coverage of micronutrients to be better with meat-based diet, because you actually have to consume huge amounts of plants, berries, and fruits to cover your micronutrient needs, whereas with meat, only like a few hundred grams is needed during a given day. As far as overdosing of iron, no, not really. And I did get some blood tests that actually showed my iron stores and ferritin levels to be very normal. These have been elevated in the past. So actually my zero carb diet normalized my levels. And I haven't actually seen any, there's like huge communities online with 15,000 people in these Facebook groups. I'm not saying everyone is eating strictly zero carb, but there are no reports of micronutrient deficiencies, iron overload, or any such symptoms. And Sean Baker authored this N equals many study where they did take some blood tests, and there were no reports of any deficiencies or anything like that. So no, I wasn't concerned about that at all. I mean, just basically looking at the data, I don't see anyone developing any nutrient deficiencies or issues with overload of any minerals at all. So since I haven't seen it, I just consider it as a non-issue. And then the final question: how expensive was this diet? Compared to eating or buying a lot of like fruits and veggies and all the food. I mean, our food budget was pretty extensive in the past, since we're concerned about eating healthy, and I'm a big guy, so I eat a lot. And looking at the numbers, I pretty much ended up at the same cost as before, simply because I stopped buying a lot of veggies and plant foods and starches and all that stuff. So for me, the cost issue wasn't really any problem.
Yeah, and food in Norwegia is usually pretty expensive.
Yeah, in Norway, meat is expensive, but I mean, if you like I did, I bought a lot of ground meat, and if you go to Sweden, you can actually get meat for cheap. So I did do a lot of that. So find sales, find bulk sales, and if you know some farmers, you can get buy whole animals for cheap. So yeah, there are many ways you can save money if you really want to.
Yeah, I like to find sales whenever I can. It really saves a ton of money, and I became famous, I guess, for stocking up on cottage cheese whenever I could. So if we start from the beginning and we discuss a bit the short-term effects, I guess, what was the adaptation period you went through, and how were energy levels, and how did that evolve during these, you said almost 90 days? And I've seen a couple of your Instagram posts where you said that satiety is incredible. Basically, you don't feel hungry at all and eat as much as you feel like. And I've seen you make these essentially slow cooking meat, I guess. And one of the other advantages of that would be a ton of glycine, because we hardly get any of that these days within our regular diet. So I guess that's another benefit to that.
Yeah, and the controversy over bone broth and collagen is still raging, or even more relevant now that we in Norway launched this myocollagen product with collagen peptides. So I'm not really going to dig into that, but the adaptation period for me was around 3 to 4 days. The hardest part of it, I mean, the brain fog and lethargy and all that stuff. And I did experience the heavy leg syndrome, where it basically, felt like you had to drag your feet upstairs, and especially leg workouts were horrible. But into the 7-8 day range, maybe after up to 10 days, I definitely noticed I was back to normal. And from there, I would say that I only noticed improvements. And as my blood test also confirmed, my CRP, the C-reactive protein, like the marker of inflammation in the body, just dropped right down to 0. So since my inflammation improved so much, my joint pain and various aches disappeared, and that probably also contributed to me feeling a lot more energetic and clear-headed. But most of the adaptation for me was over within the first or the second week of this diet. From there on, my energy levels were through the roof, I would say. I felt really well during the day. I also felt more focused, and even though this is hard to describe, I felt more driven or motivated. It's really hard to sort of pinpoint this, because there are other variables involved. But since protein intake and various amino acids can drive dopamine, maybe that's a factor. Yeah, interesting for sure. But I would say there was a clear benefit to my both my satiety and my performance and energy levels.
Very interesting. So you haven't noticed any performance drops from the lack of carbs?
I did drop my rep performance. So high rep work did suffer a bit, yeah. After a while, this improved. But doing high volume work, so like doing long workouts with, this isn't something I have been a fan of anyway. But I did notice that at the end of the workout, if I did some myo rep training, then I did notice that my performance started to suffer. But my power was much better. So short-term, short-set, low-rep performance was definitely improved.
Interesting. I've seen your before and after pictures, and you were definitely not fat in the before picture either. So what do you think that inflammation was due to? Because I'm not sure what your average settling point is. Maybe that was a bit too high for you, or maybe it was due to some foods that weren't really agreeing with your body?
It's hard to say, but going from my genetic results, and I mean, this is still in its infancy, but I have done some, like from the DNA testing companies. I did the 23andMe tests and used those data and fed it into various online interpreters and just looked at like various gene markers, and all of them pointed towards me having a really low carb tolerance. And going by my experience as well, this has been apparent. My insulin sensitivity is really high, since I tend to stay low in body fat, but I tend to oversecrete insulin, so I don't really handle carbs all that well, even though, you know, I should be able to. So genetically and probably, I don't know, maybe it's some kind of hereditary condition that led to this. But my previous high carb periods probably led to some sort of this is probably what led to the inflammation issues. Because I have noticed in the past, before I started reading up and becoming knowledgeable, that anytime I would drop my carbs, I would sort of just flush out a lot of weight in a few days. So I probably overreact to eating carb foods. And even during my contest prep periods where, an ultimate diet 2.0, like McDonald's diets, the huge carb loads always just messed me up completely. I would feel like crap, and I would get reactive hypoglycemia, and I could handle the carbs looking at insulin sensitivity alone, but I would oversecrete insulin, and it would drive me into really low blood sugar levels. So there's probably some connection there, but I also have suspected some type of food intolerance issues, and I've done various tests for this, and I find most of them to be unreliable, and it's really hard to say what is correct and what is wrong. But I definitely think that over time we can develop reactions to foods that we eat on a consistent basis, especially if these are foods that aren't suited for our genetic makeup or ancestral, or hereditary makeup.
Yeah, this whole you should rotate your protein sources on a regular basis thing, or you shouldn't eat the same protein source twice in a day. These kind of claims have been around for a long time, I guess, and I probably got into some arguments over them on Instagram or something. They seemed one of those Poliquin-esque claims that I haven't seen any evidence to back them up.
Yeah, I agree. There's no real good evidence to back this up, but sometimes when you just experience something over and over again and there's no other plausible mechanism, then what are you gonna do? Unless there's science disproving it completely, then at least be open to the idea. And this has sort of been, I used to be like the pure scientific research-based guy, but during my 20 years as a coach and working with thousands of clients, you just observe things that you still don't have any good research to explain, and so you should at least be open to the idea that, well, if you actually experience positive changes by changing the foods you eat, then maybe even though you can't prove it, then why not actually do it? At least until something better comes up.
No, with that I agree completely. And even if science says something shouldn't work, if you do something and it makes you feel bad, like that would be just kind of just like shoving a cardboard into your hands just over and over again just for the sake of it. I mean, there's no point really to it. So that's in that case, that's a smart move probably.
Yeah, I agree.
So speaking of gut improvements, I've heard Sean say on that interview that it's funny whenever he poops, there's just basically nothing coming out because you have no gut residue, I guess. So you said that your digestion improved, and I guess that would be helpful for someone who has dysbiosis or short intestinal bacterial overgrowth or something like that. But aren't you worried that this would also starve the good bacteria? And I know that the whole gut microbiota and the good bacteria and bad bacteria and whatnot is still at a very infancy level. But just from your opinion, how should we think about those considerations, and Also, what do you think about fiber intake and the usually recommended 10 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories? Because I remember listening to a podcast, and this was years ago, so I couldn't tell who it was, but it was some older guy, and he was essentially saying that, we should all just be able to tolerate eating like 100 plus 150 grams of fiber per day. And apparently he was eating these ginormous amounts of fiber, and I'm not sure how he tolerated that. But
yeah, well, like you say, I don't think we have any clear answers. What is actually good and what is bad bacteria? I think every bacteria has its function, and the balance of it will adapt to what you eat, and not only to what you eat, but your entire environment, and even to your activity levels. So there are so many things involved in regulating the intestinal microbiome that even though there are changes to the zero carb diet, how can we actually say that it's in a negative direction? And the reason I say this is, if someone is suffering from indigestion and severe digestive issues, and they switch to the zero carb diet and everything disappears and they just feel a whole lot better, then how can we actually say that there are negative consequences? If all you're seeing is positive changes, how can you actually say that this is a negative thing? And as for, there are people that have been thriving and eating and thriving on an all-meat diet for not only years, but actually also decades. And I'm not going to claim that this is for everyone, but I'm going to claim that for some people, maybe a huge intake of plant foods isn't actually beneficial. And not only of plant foods, but also of starches and carbohydrates. So perhaps in our modern environment, with the conditions we live under, maybe eating fiber and eating plant foods and eating carbohydrates all year for everyone is a bad idea. So what I say in my book is that I now consider plant foods and carbohydrates to be conditionally essential for health. And I do agree that on a Western diet, on a carb-based diet, you should probably have some fiber to even out blood sugar spikes and to feed the gut bacteria responsible for carb metabolism. But on a zero carb diet, I think the changes to the microbiome to support eating a zero carb diet can only be beneficial as long as you follow that diet. Now, I would also add that after the zero carb experiment, and I have not only seen this in myself, but in all the clients I've coached as well. There's still some of my clients that are still on the zero carb diet, but I have clients that only did it for 30 days and for 60 days and then switched over to a regular diet again. And they have all reported huge improvements in their digestive issues. They can now eat foods, and I can now eat foods that I would usually get a lot of bloating and pain from before. So I think maybe there's a therapeutic effect in actually just starving out those bacteria that are feeding on large amounts of fiber and starches and carbohydrates. On the other side of the spectrum, I've had two particular cases of vegans that are actually thriving on a lot of plant foods and have no problems eating a lot of plant foods. And as soon as they eat, of course, could also be a psychological factor, but as soon as they eat anything with meat in it, they feel physically ill. So it's hard to separate psychology from physiology, but I just think there can be some genetic or individual component here that we still don't have any good markers or indicators of only your own subjective experience with eating a certain way can tell you what you actually thrive on. So again, I just want to point out that I have clients thriving on a zero carb diet and they feel horrible when they eat a lot of plant foods. But I also have clients that thrive on eating an all plant diet and feeling horrible when they introduce meats. So I think 99% of arguments online could be avoided if people would just respect that. Maybe, yeah, sure, we are on a fundamental level, we are all humans, but I think there are so many individual factors to consider that we still don't have all the answers, and we should respect that some people, maybe actually have to eat a certain way to feel good instead of following the generic standard advice.
Yeah, definitely, and that got me thinking that even the zealots, I guess, who are, for example, very anti-carbs and anti-sugar and whatnot. They have a good point that eating a ton of highly processed, highly refined, super high in sugar carbohydrates all day and essentially starving yourself of nutrients is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, we can all agree on that. So again, the vegans that I coached, I mean, I had to remove a lot of the processed crap that they tend to eat and increase their protein intake. And so their health improved and their digestive function improved. So I mean, any diet and diet philosophy can be butchered by adding a lot of processed crap. And I think that's where we should, first of all, look at, our food selection. Try to eat whole and processed foods as much as possible, and even talk to your grandma and great grandma and ask them how they prepared food, because I think a lot of the wisdom of food is lost in our modern world, where we're so concerned about what's optimal that we're sort of forgetting that there have been thousands of years of food wisdom developed or evolved where we humans just learned how to prepare and eat foods. And sometimes we also remove completely the social aspect and the enjoyment of things, because again, we're so concerned about optimal that we stop actually enjoying it in the company of friends and family and loved ones.
Let's not even get into the whole mothers have forgotten how to cook, and of course their daughters don't know how to cook and all that. So it seems that you didn't share Sean Baker's opinion that you wouldn't need a blood test if you're feeling good. It seemed like you have done a blood test before and after. So you've already mentioned CRP. What other blood markers have you measured, and what were the results?
Well, I wouldn't say I completely disagree with him, as long as you feel good. And there are many blood markers that I think we shouldn't actually be too concerned about. I mean, for years, doctors have warned me about my high creatinine levels, and I think we all know that if you train hard, your creatinine is going to be elevated. It doesn't mean your kidneys are going to fail. But for me, I did it out of interest, and also because I knew that people would start asking questions, so I wanted to document what happened. So I basically looked at vitamin and mineral status, and I also checked my liver values, my kidney values. I did also get my hormones, my thyroid hormones, and also cholesterol, obviously. I mostly noticed improvements in everything, I would say. I did see a slight reduction in thyroid levels, the free FT3 levals, but I did also lose a lot of weight during this period, so I wouldn't expect anything less than that. And this also happened on my carb-based diet before, so I don't consider that anything to be concerned about. As for hormones, I've been on hormone replacement therapy for almost 20 years now. So obviously my testosterone levels are pretty much the same as before. My LDL cholesterol did increase, and I have covered this in my book, that, the whole science around LDL levels and cholesterol and its relationship or correlation with heart disease is getting more and more sketchy, especially considering that the LDL ranges and levels are extrapolated from a westernized diet or a carb-based diet, and not on a zero-carb diet and all-meat diet. And I'm not going to go into that whole cholesterol thing, because that's probably going to be a whole separate podcast. But if you go to Dave Feldman's site, I think his name is Cholesterol Code. Let me just look it up really quick. He has done a lot of interesting research and blood tests, looking at like LDL levels and what happens when you eat like an LCHF diet, low carb high fat diet, and how easy it is to manipulate LDL cholesterol. And I think it's a great research, a great resource on the research on the more modern cholesterol knowledge. I would mention that he has actually made up a term called the lean mass hyperresponder, where he has seen several times that lean muscular guys in hard training, when they increase their fat intakes, they also see major increases in LDL levels without any other changes in health markers or risk factors. So yeah, just to sort of mention that.
Yeah, I remember him from the Joe Rogan podcast. Sean mentioned him, I think, and I've seen some Facebook discussions around this, and I think Spencer Nadolsky said something about LDL being useful if you keep your diet constant, something like that, if you don't have huge fluctuations day to day or week to week. And he said that he has noticed the same when he experimented a bit with his diet.
Yeah, and I mean, Spencer is one of the go-to guys because he has done a lot of clinical, or maybe not research, but he has a lot of clinical data and patients, and just losing a lot of weight and going on a diet will increase LDL levels for some people a lot. So
increase, not decrease.
Increase, actually, yeah. During fasting and during extreme calorie deficit, some people will just, their LDL levels will just increase dramatically. So you should be in weight stable condition or maintenance level calories for at least 2 to 3 days before you do a blood test, simply to normalize the fluctuations.
Oh, so acutely you mean? Oh, I see what you mean.
Acutely, yeah.
Got it. I thought it would be chronically, like you lose a ton of weight and your LDL goes up. That would be weird.
Oh, yeah. No. Well, but again, still there are some people, at maintenance levels, leaner guys, muscular guys, training a lot, and they have elevated LDL levels, and they're really concerned about that, and he's sort of looking at how this can be explained by some very complex mechanisms, and I just find the whole thing really interesting, and as with many other things, I don't think we have any clear-cut answers yet, and as we all know, the whole saturated fat equals high cholesterol equals heart disease has been questioned in recent years many times over. So I think we should start to sort of look outside the box and consider many variables before we point any fingers.
Oh yeah, definitely. Although I guess the other extreme of that we should just all chug bulletproof coffee and put butter in our coffees and down cream without any restrictions. I guess that's not a good idea either. No,
completely. I mean, I think the more we start to process foods and remove ourselves from what we would eat naturally if we had free access to foods, I think that starts to mess you up. So I mean, butter in your coffee butter is a highly processed food, and we know that butter causes some real observable changes in health markers, negative changes in health markers. So yeah, I don't think that's a good idea at all.
So how long would you recommend people do this experiment if they wanted to try it out, and for what goals? Because I would imagine gaining muscle on this would be a hard thing to achieve.
Well, again, looking at the body composition data, I had one guy do DEXA scans, which is considered of higher quality than just looking at weight, and it's still fraught with some inconsistencies when you start changing water levels in the body, but he did notice some muscle mass gains and obviously pretty major drops in body fat. So I would actually recommend a zero carb diet for both fat loss and muscle gain, but most of all for fat loss, and also for people with some digestive issues. I would definitely recommend it as if you have tried other stuff and various other protocols and medications and without success, then definitely consider this. I also think you probably need at least 30 days to get through the adaptation period and to see the benefits that this diet can have. Some people, depending on their condition, they might need to go for longer than that. But yeah, I would say 30 days. I would also like to add, when we're on the topic, that there's a Hungarian researcher called Csaba Toth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but his website, paleomedicina.com, he's basically a doctor and a scientist, and he has been saying that through his years in his practice, he has tried this, what he calls the Paleolithic ketogenic diet, for on over 4,000 patients and seen some very impressive clinical data and remission of various diseases and obesity and diabetes and stuff. So I think that's definitely worth a read. He has also published some peer-reviewed papers on this, including complete remission of Crohn's disease, which is, a very serious gut disease or digestive disease. So yeah, I think it holds promise for a lot of things, a therapeutic intervention, basically.
Yeah, I just looked up his website. It's Chobo. I guess you were close.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, he has some bold claims, I guess.
He has been criticized heavily. I know that, but still, I know also his case studies and some of his patients has been pretty vocal about it online. That their complete remission of various even autoimmune diseases and I just think it's sort of the anecdotal evidence and now even some of these case studies just sort of build up and points in a direction that we should at least be open to the possibility that something we have basically been eating for millions of years, or at least the human species have been eating for tens and hundreds of thousands of years, is something that even modern humans can benefit from, and at least for short periods of time. I don't consider a 30 to 60 day experiment to be anything to be worried about, at least, and it can potentially have some really positive effects on some people.
No, I agree, definitely. The main issue arises, I guess, when these sort of people who have worked with a however large sample of the population, then they start to extrapolate those and generalize those claims to all of the population essentially. And I've seen that from vegans, I've seen that from low carb guys, like the recent debate with Martin McDonald and Professor Tim Noakes, I guess. That's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we should stop debating this. I think we should stop arguing online meaningless discussions about how everyone should eat all the time. This is a phrase I keep repeating, but I think it bears repeating because and any time someone refers to my zero carb experiments or articles, it's almost as if, again, I'm labeled as a zero carb guy just because I did an experiment, and I'm speaking of it as something that some people can have some potentially major improvements in their health and body composition doing. But becoming dogmatic about it, and you can see this, it's funny to. I've been member of vegan Facebook groups. I've been member of zero carb Facebook groups, and on both sides, people are sort of throwing rocks in each other's directions, or maybe even explosives in each other's directions, and sort of almost regarding people as stupid or inferior just because they're eating a certain way. And I think the whole thing is just ridiculous. And again, also just having sort of to defend my own perspective on it is getting really tedious. I wish people would have more acceptance that we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. I think there's still so much to learn that try to at least stay open that there are some approaches that can work for some people, but and stop generalizing and saying that everyone should eat this all the time.
Yeah, I agree completely. So how do you think this zero carb experiment would compare to a regular high protein diet, something that would also include a bit of cottage cheese, just to fancy my own taste, a couple of eggs, maybe some fruit? And essentially, that's how I eat during a fat loss phase. So what do you think of those? As long as someone can tolerate lactose, because I guess that's a big issue in certain parts of the globe.
Yeah, good question. And you actually just described my own diet right now. So yeah, I can fully support that. I'm not eating strictly zero carb anymore. My diet now is more in the direction of eating, a lot of whole unprocessed animal foods, but I do eat some fruits, I eat some berries, I have some oatmeal now and then because that's something I couldn't tolerate before, but I do like to eat it. I still can't eat a lot of it, but I can eat it, so I enjoy eating it sometimes. I have some potatoes here and there, and basically I'm just more flexible and intuitive than I was before, and I sort of stopped being scared of various foods because, this is going to ruin my body composition or my health or my digestion. So I definitely think that's a viable approach. The only thing I can say is that I have noticed when I reintroduced some other foods that it's harder to control cravings. So having more flavor in your diet, and this is probably one of the main reasons why the zero carb diet works so well for body composition and fat loss, is because it's very bland. Obviously you salt your meat and bacon tastes awesome, but it's very satiating when you cut out the sweet and a lot of the other flavors that can trigger overconsumption of foods. So it does make it slightly harder to control your calories, at least on an ad libitum diet where you just eat to fullness or to taste. But I definitely think for most people this is going to be the sustainable way to approach your diet. And not be locked into one approach, but just be more flexible and let 80 to 90% of your diet be focused on what you should eat, and the rest be what you like to eat. I think that's a lifestyle approach that most people can enjoy for the rest of their lives and also feel healthy on.
Yeah, exactly. The issue is that most people treat it the other way around. They eat 90% of what they want to eat and maybe the last 10% of what they would need to eat.
Yeah. Good point. Exactly.
So if someone tried this thing out, how should they go about reintroducing other foods, especially carbohydrates? Because I guess in a 2-3 month period would be some sort of a enzymatic downregulation of carbohydrate utilization would be at least somewhat impaired.
Well, from what I've seen, it only takes like 3 to 5 days, the same time span as it did to adapt to the zero carb diet, to go back to carbs. So if you want to be really conservative about it, start with one maybe 2 to 3 different foods that you enjoy eating or you feel safe eating. If you have had some real issues before, digestive issues, and eat those for the first 5 days, maybe 7 days, like for a week or so, and see how you feel, and then basically just go from there and reintroduce 2 to 3 new items on a weekly basis. That's a conservative way of doing it, at least.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it would make sense that we are pretty malleable, I guess, and we can adapt into either directions. And
yeah, I mean, completely. I think even food intolerances has a psychological component that people become so scared of food because we're always told that this food is dangerous and that food is allergenic or whatever, and we sort of think ourselves into tolerating less and less foods over time, and it's been proven that the immune system and stress hormones are released in correlation with how concerned we are about what we are doing. So definitely start to think about what we can eat and what we feel good on, instead of being concerned about everything that we shouldn't eat.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I hate those terms like inflammatory foods and toxic foods and the whole gluten scaremongering thing and all that rubbish. And MSG is another one, monosodium glutamate.
Yeah, exactly. I think, there's too many. I always ask this question during my presentations, what is healthy food? And people will raise their hands and mention like 3 or 5 different foods that they all consider to be really healthy. And I can always tell them, well, I can find a study that one time or another has said that this food is dangerous. There's going to be one study, there's going to be one news article, there's going to be one expert that has claimed that this food that you consider healthy is dangerous for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely think we should just try to sort of stop labeling foods as good or bad or healthy and unhealthy, and start to maybe be more aware of the conditionality of any type of food. Any food in moderation isn't in itself gonna be unhealthy. It's always gonna be a factor of what you're doing to yourself otherwise. Your overall lifestyle and the amounts of it that you're eating.
Yeah, definitely. So in the past, I think you used to recommend large carb feeding. I think that was a component of your biorhythm diet. I think I've seen some questions around this on Facebook. And then I think even a while ago, we had an interaction around timing your food intake and stopping earlier in the day. And the more I look into this, and Bill Lagakos is creating a ton of content around this whole circadian biology and circadian timing, and time-restricted eating is another hot topic, I guess, these days, and Rhonda Patrick is one of the big proponents of it. So what made you change your mind around carb feeding before bed, and do you still agree that eating more of our food earlier in the day is a better idea for health and body composition?
Yeah, I think as more research surfaced, and also I just felt more natural to synchronize food intake with daylight and activity. But back when I wrote that article, I was a proponent of early evening, late afternoon training, and so I guess I wasn't clear on that officially, and I also wasn't clear on that in my mind, that to actually make that work, to have the huge carb feeding in the evening, you should probably and most likely have a workout around that time. And so I do agree that for most people and most intents and purposes, it's a good idea to limit a high calorie intake late in the day. And by late, I'm talking like after 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. And so if you're going to eat like a huge carb meal around 10 or 11, then most people are going to notice that this disrupts your sleep. So also looking at sleep research, I noticed that huge carb intakes could mess up sleep latency and duration. And so, yeah, I guess many different lines of both research and experience showed me that the way Bill Lagakos puts it, huge carb intakes late at night is more of a damage control than optimal. And by damage control, it means that, well, this is going to be a good thing if you have a late workout that's intensive, but maybe not such a good thing if you have been inactive all day.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I do usually. I have a, well, not huge, but a decent post-workout meal, and on the days that I don't, where I work out earlier, I just have a cottage cheese or some protein pudding or something like that.
So I still even now I have some carbs before bed, but it's I'm eating my last meal around 7 or 8 o'clock, and I go to bed around 10 or 11. So it's still far away from bedtime. It was actually never right before bed in my from what I did, but I did post in the evenings, and in the evenings for me it would be like around 7 or 8 o'clock. But I do realize that some people will eat really late and then go to bed, and if you're young, active, healthy, and did a late workout, then I can fully support that, and I would actually recommend it.
I don't know if you've seen that, but I created a whole series of infographics for Renaissance around sleep, and one of the things I said was to avoid a large meal right before going to bed, and a couple of people commented, well, I eat a huge, how it goes.
Yeah, I know how it goes. Well, this is what I do, and you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So, how should we think of annual variation or seasonal variations, and fitting our diet around that? Because, for example, I don't know what it is. I don't know how long summer is in Norway, but whenever we get into late autumn and early winter, and especially during winter, like whenever the sun goes down at like 5, I'm just useless. Like
any productive work is out of the window. Like after 5, 6, I'm sleepy as hell. I'm unproductive. So whatever creative work I gotta do, I have to get it done in the morning, because otherwise I just can't seem to do it. And whenever there's light out, I can work up to 8, 9, 10 and be fine. So that definitely has an impact. Do you think there should be some variation in carb intake? And I guess one other question that popped into my mind is, should we bulk during winter at all, if we take that consideration? Because most people, that's what they do. They bulk during the winter and cut throughout the summer, and usually they are less active during the winter, and it would just intuitively make sense that they would need less food and the sun is out for a shorter amount of time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, all good questions. Let me see if I can cover them sequence here. You are really, you are right on point when it comes to how the sunlight affects our focus and our health and everything. And I think the further you get away from the equator, the further north or south you go, there are some really significant changes in our biology and physiology from season to season. So wintertime in Norway, if you go just if you go up to like Tromsø, where I just did a seminar a month ago, there's actually no sunlight in the middle of the winter. The sun doesn't come above the horizon at all. They first see the sun around January 20th, I think. And so they're really affected by, what is so accurately, the acronym is SAD, Seasonal Affective Disorder, where you actually become depressed during wintertime due to the lack of sunlight.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, and we also know how it affects vitamin D synthesis, and we know how it affects like insulin sensitivity, and carb tolerance is also very affected by sunlight and heat. And so even back in the 60s, the book Physiology of Strength by, I think it was Hedinger, his name is. Dan John keeps referring to him. I read this book. It was an East German researcher that they studied people not only during months but also years and throughout the seasons. And they noticed that during summertime, hormones would increase, strength gains would be much higher. And so everything in your body seems to be directed towards more muscle growth and storage and anabolism. So I would actually use summertime to bulk. And I know this is going to be contrary to what most people prefer doing, simply because they want to look lean during summertime for the beach. But your body is anabolic during the summertime. So even evolutionary speaking, we would eat a lot of food during summertime because food would be abundant. We would have access to not only animal foods but also plant foods and fruits and berries, and everything would be ripe and flavorful and full of nutrients. Whereas during wintertime it would be more natural in colder climates to eat all animal foods and fish. I mean, during the Viking Age, and this was before we had these earth cellars where we could store potatoes and vegetable foods for winter. So we would have to eat what was still, possible to eat that wasn't rotten. And most of our diet would be focused on proteins and fats. And incidentally, I noticed that a lot of low carb studies and keto studies seem to work better during wintertime in colder climates. And I think that's really interesting. And so I definitely think, at least as long as you live in northern climates or southern climates far removed from the equator, you should try to look at what is seasonal available where you live and at least consider eating more of that and maybe not go on the sugar binges during Christmas time, even though that's really tempting.
I was just thinking that we have 4 seasons over here, so I was thinking how I should adapt my diet around that.
Yeah, and again, most people find it really intuitive that during winter time, at least here up north, people intuitively eat more fatty meats, fatty cuts of meat, and less fruits and stuff like that. And I would myself notice that if I eat pineapple during summer, then I would be fine. If I eat a pineapple in December, I would get this intense burning in my mouth and feel really unwell afterwards. Why shouldn't this be the case, that some people actually have this really huge variations in what they can tolerate and feel well on from season to season? I think it makes sense.
Very interesting. I definitely get my fair share of fruits whatever is in season. I ate a ton of clementines and oranges these days. And during the summer, pears and grapes and plums and apples usually are year round. But eat a ton of fruit.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to say it's completely wrong. I have seen improvements when people start eating what is seasonal available, while others don't even notice any difference at all. So it's just going to depend on your age and how healthy you are, and again, your genes. I definitely think there's a genetic component that we still haven't mapped out there. So I don't have all the answers. I can only point in various directions when people come to me for advice and wonder why their health is so bad when they're doing everything that the experts are saying they should do, and it still doesn't work. So that's why I have developed all of these methods and theories and thoughts around nutrition and also training.
I was thinking whether we should eat what's available in the land or what's available in a supermarkets. Because for example, bananas, I guess I'm pretty sure they're available all year round, and they definitely don't grow over here. So
yeah, and again, for me, I don't tolerate tropical fruits very well, and my ancestry, when I checked it through 23andMe and also from research, I have a Viking ancestry, and my ancestors have lived in Scandinavia for several generations. So that probably explains why tropical fruits don't sit very well with me. But I mean, in small amounts, you can get away with anything, I think. I also had this one client from Iran, and he would, he came to Norway, and obviously he hated the climate because it was too cold, he said, even in summertime. And he had some very, major problems losing fat and getting strong in the gym, and he just felt worse and worse. And he had adopted the Norwegian diet, as he called it, just basically eating whatever was in the supermarkets here. And so I told him, well, just as an experiment, why not try eating what your grandmother taught you for a short time and see what happens. And it was like a couple of months, and he reported back to me and had, lost a lot of fat, and obviously enjoyed his food much more because, he liked the food that he grew up on as well, and just generally felt much better. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, I had this Sami girl, the Samis, which are a population in the north of Norway. Their language is very, it sounds almost Finnish. And their diet is primarily meat, meat and fish. That's what they have been brought up on. They eat very little vegetation or plants. And she had been eating a very healthy, wholesome diet with like 200 grams of carbs, and she had been doing everything correctly and still couldn't get it to work. She was training really hard and always suffering from inflammation and pains and aches and digestive issues. And I told her, well, since you have been eating and brought up on, and your ancestry is Sami, maybe you should try eating like your ancestors did. And lo and behold, after only a few weeks, she reported back to me, and there was major improvements in how she felt, and her performance in the gym improved, and the fat just, melted off her, and she felt awesome. So yeah, do I think there's an ancestral component there? Definitely. Can I prove it? No, I can't.
Yeah, it would make sense, and not to go on another tangent, but this is the whole issue with the paleo diet, because it seems, it's portrayed as a single diet, and there wasn't a single paleo diet.
Exactly.
There were a bunch of paleo diets, so paleo diet, which paleo diet?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, there are genetic changes that happen through only a few generations. It doesn't take like tens of thousands of years alter our genes or how we how we handle and process foods. Just look at lactose tolerance. I mean, in the Nordic countries, we have a high prevalence of lactose tolerance, which means that we can drink milk and feel just fine. But in Asia, I think the prevalence of lactose intolerance is 90% plus. So, I mean, just looking at that and from what I can remember, I think this evolved over only maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years. So it's not in the grand scheme of things, it's not a long time.
From what I've seen, I'm not sure of the data, but certainly all the people I know are fine with milk. And until a couple years ago, there were no lactose-free milk products, and now the supermarkets are full with them. So I don't think that's biological need driven.
Exactly.
So I have one final, I guess, two-part question, and both of them are related to sustainability. So first, do you prefer buying organic, or do you just stick with regular fruits and veggies? And the second part is, what do you think about sustainability for the planet when it comes to this whole all-meat diet? Because obviously red meat is considered one of the biggest factors, I guess, we could do, or reduce the consumption of it to positively influence the sustainability and of our diets, I guess, and the health of the planet, or whatever the vegan claim is. So what do you think about those questions?
Well, as far as the sustainability argument, I have seen claims on both sides, and I honestly haven't dug deep into that to actually validate which side is true. I think they're both true. I think the main problem is that we are becoming, there are more and more people on the planet every year, and the food supply is deteriorating both in quality and quantity. So I honestly don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. The global footprint and I mean the climate footprint on producing meat, the way it's done. Especially in America and many countries in the world is really bad for the planet. I agree on that completely. But there are also some, the way they grow corn and wheat and all of the plant foods, and also in terms of the energy these plant foods can actually supply us with. It just becomes hugely complex mathematical question, as well as our environmental. In short, I think we should produce food the way we did a couple of 100 years ago, when we did it like in a more sustainable way and in line with nature, and we sort of considered more of the ecosystem. I'm not saying everyone did, but I think we could probably, with the knowledge we have of how the ecosystems function and interact, and how we can actually produce food with less environmental costs, we could sort of save the planet. But I think the food industry and driven by marketing demands is, I think that's utopia. I think it's impossible. I don't think it's going to happen that way. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I really don't know at this time. But for me, I'm going to make choices on what I feel best on, what tends to improve my health markers the most. I obviously fully support any type of intervention that reduces the environmental loads on how we produce our food. So I actually donate money, and I support the biodynamic farmers and organic farmers and do what I can in that regard. But that's the limit to what I can do and what I can recommend that people do. I think we can make that sort of food both more acceptable and less expensive if more people start to request that from the local supermarkets, and farmers can actually survive on their own crops, growing them in a more biodynamic fashion. In modern society, I think that's just really hard to do because the food industry is dominating.
So with regards to the organic fruit versus veggies, then you would buy organic simply to support the organic, which would be the more sustainable farming practice in your view?
In my view, yeah. From what I know, that's the best way to do it. And again, that's an issue that you can see arguments on both sides, but I think it's safe to say that the organic and biodynamic way of growing crops is the better way for the environment.
Okay, we could talk about that for hours, so I think we'll just stop here. And
yeah, I honestly don't have enough knowledge of that to give any good advice on that, but that's what I do for myself personally.
Yeah, and I agree with the whole I agree with the message of trying to do whatever we can to improve the quality of our food and I guess the reach of food to everyone on the planet, and that's why I support guys like Kevin Folta and other engineers who try to engineer food that's healthier and safer and more sustainable and I guess cheaper.
Yeah, I agree on that completely.
So in case anyone wants to get in contact with you, where should they go? Maybe if they want to get in contact with you for coaching or any other projects you're involved?
Yeah, if people want to follow me, then go to my website, børgefagerli.com. Follow me on Facebook, obviously. I have an official page where I post most of my stuff that I tend to share on my private page, but those are the main channels that they can reach me. And there's a contact form there, and there's information about my coaching as well.
Awesome. And I will link all those in the description so that people can just find it easily.
Thank you.
So with that, we have arrived to the final question of the episode, and that is simply, what is your definition of success?
Oh God, that's a loaded question, I guess. My definition of success would be contextual, I guess, but as far as success in the fitness industry, at least, I think it's when you can honestly say that you are still humble and you are able to make a living, at least, and that you are able to help people become better and to learn more. I guess my philosophy has always been, try to save the world one person at a time. Because in today, with our social media and TV and internet, I think it's too easy to become lost in the noise, and the signal to noise ratio is becoming worse and worse on a daily basis. So success would be that you have a wholesome, healthy message and you're able to reach as many people as possible and make positive changes in their life.
Yeah, I agree completely, and that's a great way to end the episode. Børge, I would like to thank you for giving up your time today, and we have gone way over what we initially settled on, so I'm extremely grateful, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you, and I find your approach refreshing. And there are a couple of guys like you, but it's definitely rare for people to be evidence-based, but also not dogmatic, I guess, and not close to trying out new things. So kudos to you, and I really look forward to whatever you're going to do next.
Thank you so much. Those were some very kind words, and I appreciate you inviting me on to be on this podcast, and I hope that people listening to this got some clarifications and some answers and sort of know where I'm getting from. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me, and thanks for having me.
So that was episode 15 of the Muscle Engineer podcast with Børge Fagerli. I hope you enjoyed the episode and found it helpful, and if you did, please share it with a friend who might benefit from it, or with someone who perhaps heard of this diet and doesn't know what to think of it, or isn't sure if their situation would be suitable to try this. So I hope that this gave you a balanced perspective on it and offered you some pros and some cons to balance a way out and consider whether you should try it or not for yourself. Now, I won't give you my usual top 3 takeaways, mainly because I am honestly not sure how many people listen until the end, and I have a hunch that most people just kind of tune out after the episode is over and don't even listen to my outro. So what I thought I would do is, instead of doing these at the end of the episodes, I am going to list them in written format on my Instagram profile, where I've been absent for a good week or so since my phone died, and as you might know, you can't really post anything if you don't have the mobile app. So until I get it back, I will be off Instagram and pretty much social media in general. But after I do receive my phone, I will start posting regularly as I did previously, and there I will share my top 3 takeaways from this episode, and I will also start a new project, I guess, if I might call it that, something that I promised a lot of people I would do, which will be daily summaries of some podcast episodes I enjoyed. So look forward to that, and summer to this episode too, when all the technical issues get sorted out. So thank you for listening, and we will be back next week with another great episode. So until then, hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk soon.